And it's like, it's very simple arithmetic to just say, okay, here's our stated capacity, here's the amount of the credit, multiply them together, $4.9 billion. But nobody on Wall Street seems to be like capable of doing this.
What I wanted to ask you, because you have worked in the energy sector, can people really see what's happening there? Because if you look at the energy sector, of course, it's much bigger than the car sector, actually. So this means, what does Tesla do so differently that this has so much value for them, for the business and everything? I mean, those, for me at least, I find it very interesting, those peaker plants, for example, that could be replaced by the megapacks, of course. And so how do you see in the energy sector, maybe that people might overlook a little bit why the megapack is so relevant for people who are not in the energy business? So
sure. So, kind of going back to around 10 years ago, I think is roughly when I entered the energy space. And, at that time, the trend was just, coal plants were becoming uneconomical on their own. And so you had coal plants retiring really somewhat consistently over the last 10 years. And coal plants, by their nature, they don't like to be ramped up and down, so they have a very constant output. And so that's what we call in the power sector base load power. So it's essentially always there, it's always going to run, but you removed a good chunk of that base load power from the grid. Now, when you remove base load power, that increases volatility of prices because you've got a somewhat reliable source of megawatts going into the grid that are no longer going in there on a consistent basis. So a little bit of volatility there. And for the most part, for let's just say 2013 through 2018, roughly speaking, most of that reduction in coal was picked up by natural gas. So it would be peaking plants, but actually mostly it's more efficient natural gas plants that are actually able to ramp up and down pretty substantially. So that the natural gas kind of sector of the electricity generation industry really grew. But then really in the last 5 years, so 2018 to 23, and this trend's been going on for a long time, but it was really small up until maybe the last 5 years. You had renewables really start to be the driving source of new generation capacity on the grid. Certainly in Germany actually really led the way, especially on wind, and that really helped to make the costs cheaper throughout the rest of the world as the technology just improved from some of the incentives that Germany put in place. So thank you for that and for your high prices that you're paying.
Oh God, yeah.
we could do a whole separate deep dive on that issue, but with the feed-in tariffs and everything that Germany went through, it's a pretty interesting topic.
And you mentioned brown or coal. We have some brown coal plants again back online.
Back online, yeah.
Because it's crazy.
Kind of crazy.
We have a crazy mix, but of course it's true that the renewables are still growing and growing and growing. The dependencies also, because energy is also a huge chunk of conflict.
There's national security implications and everything, but just to kind of land the point to get back to what you were originally asking. So you had really substantial increase in renewables, which of course we all know they're intermittent because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, and so that also kind of increased volatility of electricity prices. And because electricity is one of the only commodities out there that can't be stored. If you produce too much oil, you can put it in tanks, and they've got a lot of storage facilities that you can store months of oil, or almost any other commodity. Steel you can just pile up, coal you can pile up, but electricity has to be used immediately or you lose it, except for and then there's a little bit of storage, like pumped storage, but there's very few of that. If you look at the percentage of the overall electricity consumption that can be stored in existing facilities, it's quite small. So the increase in volatility, and then also the increase in wholesale market prices. So prices, at least in most places of the United States, from people I've spoken to, prices on wholesale power markets have roughly doubled in the last 5 years or so. And the volatility of the prices have really increased as well. And so with these dynamics, playing out the way that they have, and with all the forecasts out there essentially calling for more renewables to be added, that creates a very urgent need for a large scale of stationary storage, which right now Tesla is really the only game in town. Now there are some other people that are manufacturing batteries for stationary storage purposes, but frankly, just not at scale. At least outside China. China does have a fair amount of stationary storage capacity capability, but in most Western markets, a lot of the storage players are really in startup mode. They're trying to build factories, and they're not profitable yet. And they're certainly not producing anything like Tesla's trying to do at Lathrop, getting to 40 gigawatt hours a year, solely devoted for stationary storage. So what's really unique about Tesla is they're ramping up the storage part of the business with a product that's well understood by the market. It's what we call bankable, so banks will finance against it because they know the technical performance and specifications. That's a very big deal in terms of project finance. And so Tesla is essentially ramping this up right at the moment when the market really needs it. And I think that's what's unique about their position.
Yeah, totally. And it's crazy that still, if you look at some of the Wall Street analysts, or also in the financial media in the US, when you follow some of the shows that are there, you realize that many people still think Tesla is a car company. And it's interesting that this is still so big. And when do you think people will turn, or Wall Street will 100% realize, wait a second, here's a huge energy segment going on? So what's your opinion on that?
It seems to me that Wall Street doesn't like to believe anything that Tesla or Elon says until it shows up in the financials. Yeah. So, that's why I think that it could be a somewhat meaningful catalyst this quarter if they actually do produce, the margins that I'm expecting on the energy side of the business. Because if you do the math on what they've announced, it's already really crazy. I mean, one of the things I like to kind of point to highlight this is, the Gigafactory Nevada that they're talking about expanding to 100 gigawatt hours of house-made cells, which qualify for a credit in the United States Inflation Reduction Act. Just the credits alone on 100 gigawatt hours out of that Giga Nevada plant is worth $4.9 billion per year. And it's it's very simple arithmetic to just say, okay, here's our stated capacity, here's the amount of the credit, multiply them together, $4.9 billion. But nobody on Wall Street seems to be capable of doing this, or they just say, well, we'll wait and see, and eventually once they kind of ramp up, maybe we'll give them a little more credit then. But to me, it's just crazy that you've got such a meaningful kind of source of margins and cash flow headed Tesla's way, and Wall Street's attitude is just I'll wait and see. Once it actually shows up, then maybe we'll give it a little valuation credit. So we'll see.
Yeah, do you think it's comparable to what was happening with Amazon and Sears back then, back in the day, that people thought, Amazon can never compete with Sears, and suddenly, they took over the whole market, and we all know that Sears isn't anymore. So, what do you? I think is it comparable or not? Yeah.
I do think it's a reasonable comparison, and even before then, it was they were an online bookseller to start with, and people were like, well, how are they going to compete with Barnes and Noble? It's just, it's kind of, laughable and sad in retrospect. But I think there are a lot of people on Wall Street who kind of have this mindset of what an industry is, and Tesla doesn't really fit those conceptions, and clearly neither did Amazon. But you kind of see how well those comparisons lasted. I think Tesla really is in a unique position because, Elon thinks about things from a first principles perspective. And, that leads to having an automotive /energy /AI company, which I think is poised to really generate a whole lot of cash flow. But you can't put them just in the bucket of an automotive company, because you're really missing everything that's going to happen in the future if you just simplify it down that much and you start comparing them to Ford and GM. That comparison has never made sense. And if you're somebody who's relied on those comparisons to make your investment decisions, you've lost a lot of money over the years.
Absolutely, yes. And talking about the competition, GM and Ford here, do you think that the UAW strikes are gonna be factored in somehow? Maybe not this quarter, but next quarter or something. Do you see that maybe this is something that is yeah, it was such a pain point for the legacy car manufacturers in the US that Tesla will be, in comparison, more and more attractive to investors who maybe are not invested in Tesla? Or
It's hard to say how this will pan out, to be
mm,
honest. It does seem unavoidable that the car companies are going to end up paying a little bit more, which is going to squeeze their margins. Um, to me, it's just it almost seems like they're already kind of at death's door. I mean, with these, it might be a little bit premature because they're not in any imminent risk of bankruptcy. But with Tesla's price cuts, and frankly, just how good the product is compared to anything that at the comparable price point that the legacy companies are pumping out, I really don't know how you compete, especially when they're so far behind on like the technology. And if you fast forward a couple of years, when Tesla's got the Gen 3 platform and it's like partially being assembled with Optimus, and like what the margin potential of that is at a much lower entry point, price wise for customers. I mean, imagine it actually just does retail for $25,000, and then on top of that, there are government subsidies in most parts of the world that'll make the effective cost even lower, and it's just a much better experience from on an ownership perspective. And I think we all know that EVs actually last longer than an ICE vehicle. So once consumers kind of do that math, it's like they're going to be undercutting the total cost of ownership by half, I think, in the not too distant future. And so I think even if Ford and GM didn't have these kind of labor issues, I don't know how they would survive that. But they're talking about giving raises of like 30% potentially, and cutting the like work days. And I think at this moment in time, when you've got technological ramp up that's making essentially bringing deflation to the automotive sector, I don't know how you can afford to pay your employees 20-30% more and have them work less. That just the math of that's going to be unsustainable. So honestly, I kind of hope I'm wrong and I'm missing something, because I've got a lot
mm,
of friends that I'm in the Metro Detroit area here in Michigan, and so there's a lot of people that I know that would be really significantly impacted by this. So it's not something that I take any delight in, but to me, it just seems blatantly obvious that we're kind of running down the wrong path here.